and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Well, good morning, good afternoon to people in the States. I'd like to speak a little bit today about ethics. It's one of the 6 parameters or the 6 perfections. They are generosity, ethics, patience, energy or vitality, concentration, and wisdom. And we've had talks here before on patience and also on generosity. So today, doing ethics. And I'd like to start with a quote or some paragraphs from Reb Anderson's book, Entering the Mind of Buddha. And the chapter is called The Perfection of Ethics. A virtuous life. The precepts of compassion roar like thunder. The kind heart is wondrous as great clouds, pouring Dharma rain of sweet dew. It's from the Lotus Sutra. Bodhisattva ethical precepts are ultimately beyond words. Out of great compassion, the Buddhas return from silence and stillness and give us precepts in words to help us realize the true precepts. We offer words for the sake of realizing the Bodhisattva precepts that words cannot reach. While we do this, we also remember that the true precepts are living together with us right now in silence and stillness. All the great vehicle teachings of the Buddhas are given in order to inspire, encourage, and illuminate the ethical responsibility of bodhisattvas. The ethical responsibility of bodhisattvas is to realize unsurpassed, complete, and perfect awakening for the welfare of all living beings. These precepts are the way we are truly living together with all beings. And as practitioners, the way we conduct ourselves is the visible way we are expressing the teachings. It begins with our thoughts, what we think, and that translates into our words and our actions. And we are realizing and expressing the teachings when we function in ethical ways. And ideally, we do that kind of naturally. We don't need to do that with too much effort. Maybe we need some effort. But as our practice deepens, it becomes the way we are. Just recently, we had full moon precepts renewal ceremony here, as in many different Zen centers around the world at the full moon. And in that, we chant a repentance verse that begins with all my ancient twisted karma from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. Born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. And avow is to openly confess. And sometimes I have this little maybe you could call it a little bit of anxiety, that when people hear that, they may hear it as saying, all my ancient twisted karma from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion as being very specific to them. And that might sound kind of harsh. But the Buddhist way of seeing ethics is not really quite like that. It's a little bit like we're a piece of pure white silk when we're born. And it bumps up against things that have marks on them, and it gets stained. But it starts off just a pure white piece of silk. I think this is an important distinction when we think about ethics from a different point of view, which is that we are born with an original stain, sometimes called sin. And I'm not sure that the true teachings really say that, but certainly a great deal of people do feel that they are born sinful, that they are born with some original stain or taint, that they are born with a tendency towards things such as greed or laziness or dishonesty. One of the reasons I was drawn to Buddhist practice is because it didn't really frame it that way. It framed it more that we are pure and unstained, and that the vagaries of life lead us to acquire and then feed and amplify delusive thoughts that cause harm to us and cause harm to others. And all of those harmful, delusive thoughts have the common error of thinking that there is a self that is distinct from another. That's the common thread in all delusive thinking, is that I am here and you are there, and I am distinct and independent, and so are you. And from that sense of a separate self, cascading down from that one thought is all the errors of our thinking that cause us to function in not ethical ways, in harmful ways. I like to think of it a little bit like when we look at trees or plants or other animals, when they're in a harmonious environment, they all support each other. In a healthy environment, there is no plant or animal or insect doing any harm to any other plant, animal, or insect. It might superficially look like they are, like a carnivore eats something, kills and eats another animal. But from a bigger picture, all of those plants and animals are creating and supporting a wholesome world. None of them are sinful. None of them are stained. They're all functioning out of a kind of life-affirming, they're just life-affirming. And they're not trying to be life-affirming. They're just being life-affirming. Their pure existence is life-affirming. And maybe this is why we enjoy being in nature so much. As we can sense somehow that there's no delusion in nature. But when the natural environment is disrupted, then things do change in a very disrupted ecological system. Then you have animals that are out of balance with other animals, and they destroy other species, and you have invasive plants that destroy other plants' environment, and it gets all out of balance. And some people might even think of those plants and animals as bad. But I do think most of us know that the plant isn't bad. and the carp in the lake isn't bad, even though it's eating all the native fish. We understand that it's just an imbalance that's occurred, and it's not their fault. They're not at fault. They're just functioning the best they can in an unhealthy environment. And we can think of ourselves in that way, that when we are in a completely healthy environment, we are going to be healthy beings, and we're going to be ethical and just naturally, without any particular forethought, will be kind and good and caring and empathic. But when we're in a disrupted environment, we start to function in ways that are unhealthy. And given the complexity of modern society, it's probably not really possible for any of us to escape that. I imagine all of us have experienced injustices in our lives that have caused us pain. We've failed to receive things that are vital to receive. Physical, emotional, psychological nutrients that we haven't received. And that's disrupted our capacity to function from a naturally wholesome place in the way that trees and birds and other animals do. This is an empathic and compassionate way to view ourselves. To view our transgressions and to view our failings. When we falter and we behave in a way that in hindsight we don't feel good about, we can try and see it within the much bigger ecology of our lives. What are all the causes and conditions that caused us to be that way? I can see how one could argue, well, other animals and plants don't have volition the way we have volition, so maybe it's not a fair analogy to make, that we have volition to make choices, so we are more responsible for our actions. And this is a very subtle and nuanced philosophical and religious question about volition. But I find I am more compassionate towards others when I view their actions, and I'm more compassionate towards myself. I view my actions as being the culmination of everything that has happened in my life. It's definitely a very compassionate way to view other people when we see them doing something that we consider a transgression, is to say, if not for the grace of God, go I. What is the saying? If but for the grace of God, go I. I think that's how it goes. Basically, if I had that exact life, I'd do the exact same thing. If I'd had all those conditions, I would make the same mistakes. I would be just as cruel. I would be just as arrogant. I would be just as careless. To have that attitude towards others really helps us, I think, to view people in a much more creative and compassionate way, to try and imagine what all the causes and conditions are. And we can do the same for ourselves, particularly if we have a tendency to be very self-critical. But we can also, for ourselves, think of this moment as fresh. It's fresh in that it's not that all the past isn't still there. It's not as if the storehouse consciousness isn't still influencing who we are, but we're also here with the teachings, and in this moment we can recall the teachings. And if the conditions are right, we do recall the teachings, and then we vow to do better in the next moment. So I often do that with myself. I feel I may have made a small transgression. I go, fresh moment. How can I let this fresh moment inform me? How can I let the mistake that I just made and my reflection about the mistake that I just made, how can that inform me in this new moment to do better? We're very fortunate that we have this opportunity to hear the teachings that are teachings of compassion. That's what these teachings are. They're teachings of compassion, of connectedness, and of intimacy with all beings. We hear these teachings. They are the causes and conditions that have just preceded the moment that we are now in. And we influence other people and change the causes and conditions of their lives as well. That's what we're doing every time we speak to someone, every time we have eye contact with someone. We're influencing the causes and conditions of their life. And what we are hoping is that we are influencing the causes and conditions of their life in such a way that they will be more at ease and kinder people themselves. I was reminded too of another quote from our Christian traditions. When Jesus was on the cross, he says, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." And forgive them, they know not what they do. It resonates with our teachings on delusion. Our deluded thoughts are because we do not know that we are all one unified world. We forget that. We have the delusion that we're separate. We don't know what we're doing. We make mistakes. We're caught up in a delusion. So we can forgive each other our delusions, forgive each other our ignorance. Somewhere in our teachings is also the line, 1,000 mistakes, 10,000 mistakes. I saw that written in calligraphy on a Kyosaku stick, the sticks that are used sometimes in the Zendo to invigorate people's practice. Struck on the shoulders to invigorate their practice. A loud whack. 1,000 mistakes, 10,000 mistakes. It made me smile when I read that, a sense of a kind of humility and humor at the human condition, and just a love for us all, the way we all falter. So when we do this chant, all my ancient twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. It might be helpful to think of that more as collectively, all our ancient twisted karma, all of us together. It has a quality about it when we think of it that way, of not falling into self-referencing guilt or self-referencing defensiveness. Instead of falling into that, we think, all our ancient twisted karma, all of us together. I don't need to, I've got it in my head. One of my favorite koans is from the Blue Cliff record, case 87, Yun Men's disease and medicine subdue each other. Yun Men was teaching his assembly and said, medicine and disease subdue each other. The whole world is medicine. What is the self? What is your self? But I like, what is the self? Disease and medicine subdue each other. There's many different translations, but I like subdue. There's something very gentle about that together, difficulty and skillfulness together, they work together like a dance. They subdue the suffering. Disease and medicine together subdue the suffering. The whole world is medicine. If we can turn that way with our mind, the whole world is medicine. As soon as we make a transgression, an ethical transgression, and we make a mistake, that very moment of the mistake and the noticing of the mistake, we're just calling it a mistake. That very moment of noticing the mistake, it's a rich moment for creative reflection, a rich moment for medicine to arrive. I was discussing this koan with a dear friend of mine, a man I've known for many, many years, very gentle, wonderful practitioner. And he shared with me a story, and I was quite surprised that when he was a teenager, he was a very angry young man. He was raised in a household with a lot of anger. And in high school, he was on the tennis team, and they were at a tournament, and it was a doubles tennis tournament. And during the game, I don't know the right language that people use for tennis, but he did a shot and the umpire called it out, and he was sure it was in. And he had so much anger rise up in his body that he got his tennis racket and smashed it against the post that holds up the net and destroyed his tennis racket right in the middle of the match. All the people watching, and it was a competition. And of course, he was disqualified for that, and therefore his team just lost, it defaulted to the other team. And when that happened to him, he got this very profound sense of, I don't want to ever do that again with my life. I don't want to be an angry person anymore. I don't want to cause harm to other people with my anger, because he disappointed, his whole team, his school team. And how it is that he had that capacity in that moment, we don't know. But other causes and conditions in his life gave him the capacity in that moment to make this strong medicine for himself. And I'm sure he's had little bits of anger here and there since that time, but in the many, many years that I've known him, I would never even imagine him being an angry person. In a very genuine way, just naturally a very at ease, caring person. So a lovely example of disease and medicine subduing each other. So whenever our mind is unsettled, in any way when our mind is unsettled, we can take full responsibility for that unsettledness. Like the tendency is to often say, I'm unsettled because of what happened over there. But there's a lot more power, a lot more agency in saying, my mind is unsettled because of the way I am viewing what happened over there, the way I'm viewing myself in relation to what happened over there. And we can turn that unsettled mind into medicine. That unsettled mind is medicine and can turn us towards a more ethical response in the next moment. I wanted to finish with some words from the Diamond Sutra, because speaking about ethics, we can have a tendency to get a little rigid about what ethical behavior is, whether we're doing it, whether somebody else is being ethical. It's not hard to get a little opinionated about ethics. And we want to be really careful to keep ourselves fluid and not too opinionated. Having an actual fixed opinion, maybe in itself, is a little bit unethical. And I'm not sure if that's so. Okay. All throughout the Diamond Sutra, there's these, the Tathagata speaks in this particular way, so I'm going to give a couple of examples. This section's called "The Practice of Good Works Purifies the Mind." Furthermore, Subhuti, this, and it's got this in italics, and in the previous section it was talking about the awakened mind. Furthermore, Subhuti, this awakened mind is altogether everywhere, without differentiation or degree. Therefore it is called consummation of incomparable enlightenment. It is straightly attained by freedom from separate personal selfhood and by cultivating all kinds of goodness. Subhuti, though we speak of goodness, the Tathagata declares that there is no goodness. Such is merely a name. It's a very important caution for us to not get caught even in goodness, even in ethics. That we can't actually locate good anywhere. We can't locate ethics anywhere. We can't locate purity anywhere. We can't locate a being that is pure. But in knowing that purity and being are only words, we can say we are like a piece of white silk with no stains. We can say that knowing that there is no such thing as white silk or self. And a little further on, there's a section called The Illusion of Ego. Subhuti, what do you think? Let no one say the Tathagata cherishes the idea, I must liberate all living beings. Allow no such thought, Subhuti. Wherefore? Because in reality there are no living beings to be liberated by the Tathagata. If there were living beings for the Tathagata to liberate, he would partake in the idea of selfhood, personality, ego entity, and separate individuality. Subhuti, though the common people accept egoity as real, the Tathagata declares that ego is not different from non-ego. Subhuti, those whom the Tathagata refers to as common people are not really common people. Such is merely a name. So the same really applies to good people, bad people, ethical people, unethical people. We just do our best to be of service with no fixed views. Like bobbing on the water, like a little bit of a leaf bobbing on the water, downstream, doing our best, not fixing it on anything, even on ethics. Okay, I think I'll finish there. If anyone would like to ask a question or comment,